And we're really looking at the entire food system within one broader network. And we're not looking to address one piece of it at a time. We're really working to transform the entire system.
Flipping the table.
Hello, this is Michael. It is great to be back with you after several weeks of intensive activity here in California. As promised in episode 1 of this third season of Flipping the Table, I said we'd focus all year on the activities of Roots of Change, the entity that I have led for 15 years. Roots of Change, or ROC as we call it, is a catalyst for spawning and organizing large-scale projects designed to transform agriculture and our food system, to make them more just, healthy, and resilient. For us, this has always meant working in alliances or coalitions. We do this because reformers need many allies to create pressure for change in entrenched systems like food and ag. Today, I'll be conversing with 3 powerful allies in an effort to create and pass an extremely innovative piece of California legislation that would allow an unprecedented investment in key elements of our food system in this state. Let me introduce them. Andy Naja-Reese is Chief Executive Officer of the Agricultural Institute of Marin, a nonprofit that connects communities to local and regional food systems so the public can access healthy and sustainably grown food. Andy brings a unique perspective to nonprofit executive management after spending 10 years with the federal government, including the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service, where he oversaw the administration of $12 billion in benefits redeemed by 8 million low-income households at grocery stores and farmers markets across 8 western states. Cesar Lara is the executive director of the Monterey Bay Central Labor Council, the local body of the AFL-CIO. He was raised on the Central Coast as the child of immigrant farm workers. His council serves 80 affiliated unions representing more than 37,000 members. The mission of the council is to bring economic justice to the workplace and social justice to the Monterey Bay area. Cesar is the policy advisor for building healthy communities in East Salinas and director of the Central Coast Citizenship Project. Prior to his tenure at the Labor Council, Cesar was the state director of the United Farm Workers nonprofit La Unión del Pueblo Entero and a congressional aide to Congressman Sam Farr. Jeannie Merrill has served as California Climate and Agricultural Network's policy director since the coalition was founded in 2009. She has over 20 years of experience in agricultural, environmental, and energy policy work at the state and national levels. Prior to CalCan, she served as Associate Policy Director with the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute in Wisconsin. Jeannie has served as a board member of the Midwest Organic Services Association and served for 6 years on the Organizational Council of the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. She currently serves on the Agricultural Advisory Group at the Department of Water Resources. So welcome to you all, and let's dive into this juicy and timely topic. Jeannie, let's begin with you, if you don't mind. Who is the author and what is AB 125 and how does it relate to a nearly $800 million budget request for this year?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking and thanks for having us today. AB 125 is authored by Assembly Member Robert Rivas, who is also the chair of the Assembly Agriculture Committee. And AB 125 would place a bond proposal before the voters in the fall of 2022 to fund $3.3 billion in investment for the economic recovery and climate resilience of California's food and farm system. So it's an innovative investment proposal to help the state combat hunger, improve the safety and well-being of farm workers, develop regional food economies, and climate-resilient farms.
Wow. And how does that relate to the 800 million? Or
Great
almost
question.
772 million, actually.
Yes. Well, as you may have heard, the state of California has a significant budget surplus this year. Anywhere between $50 and $80 billion is one estimate of the amount of budget surplus the state of California will experience in the upcoming fiscal year. And as a consequence of that, because our bond proposal wouldn't go before the voters until next year if we're successful, we wanted to seize upon that and say, there are investments that need to happen now to address hunger, to address farm worker safety, and so much more. And so we're interested in having a portion of AB 125 investments funded now so that we can begin to achieve an equitable economic recovery for California focused on our food and farm system.
Great. Okay. That's good. Cesar, so what kind of groups make up the coalition behind both the bill and this budget request we just heard about?
Well, we actually have a huge coalition that has come together from worker rights organizations like myself at the Labor Council, to environmental organizations, to just worker supportive or organizations that really support our Black and Brown communities across California.
So it sounds like a pretty diverse coalition.
It's one of the most diverse coalitions I've been part of in all my years in the labor movement and doing this kind of work.
Well, that's good to hear. So, Andy, from your perspective, why is this? Why this bill, and why is it so groundbreaking? I mean, it seems innovative to me from my experience. And what would you say about that?
Well, I'd say that the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the dysfunctions and the weaknesses within our local and regional food and farming systems. And this bill and this bond and this budget ask would invest state resources to not only help repair areas of dysfunction within our food systems, but also to charter a new path forward. We're dealing with the interrelated crises of the loss of farmland, institutional racism, the impacts of the climate crisis, rising rates of hunger. And for the first time, we're seeing legislation and a budget request that will help to address these interrelated problems. I mean, I believe that the best solutions solve multiple problems, and AB 125 in this budget ask is doing just that.
It's a systems approach, which is appealing to me. It seems like it's a real systems approach, which you don't often see.
Right. And I think especially tied to what Cesar was saying, we have within the same coalition and the same legislation, we're looking at food access, sustainable agriculture, food and farm worker rights, improving food economies. And we're really looking at the entire food system within one broader network. And we're not looking to address one piece of it at a time. We're really working to transform the entire system.
Mm-hmm. I like that because I think you'll get synergies right from that. So,
right.
So let's get into more specifics so that people understand, basically or some of what, because it's a very big piece of, it's a large budget request, and it's a very large piece of legislation that would be the bond eventually. But so, Cesar, maybe you could talk about how would this actually help farm workers in our state if they were to either do the budget, pass the budget this year and include the things, or eventually with the bond.
Well, the biggest thing is that, housing for farm workers is critically important. And one of the things that we learned from COVID is it really shined a light on a problem that has been existing for a while. And this bond sets money aside to really invest in that and really look at how we're able to support farm workers in housing with farm worker housing. And also at the same time, really look at the new normal that we're living in with investing millions of dollars into making sure that we set aside PPE, personal protection equipment for farm workers. In California, we have multiple seasons, and one of them is the fire season, and it's the farm workers that are out there, working in agriculture, no matter what the weather is like. And we probably all have seen the pictures when some of the biggest forest fires in California were happening. Farm workers were still out in the field working, and they need protection. They need to have equipment set aside. So those are two critical points around farm workers. But also in particular, it also sets money aside to support food banks and other workers out in the community. So it's really groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So let's build off that. You mentioned the food banks, Andy. You with your long history at Food and Nutrition and working to make sure people get fed, and your focus on healthy food access. How do you see this improving the situation?
Well, I think that here in California, we know that we are one of the largest producers of fruits and vegetables in the entire country, and actually almost half of the fruits and vegetables in the U.S. come from the state. But nearly a quarter of our own households lack access to these valuable commodities and healthy foods. And we've seen that even more so among Black, Latinx, and multiracial families, especially families with children, where we're seeing rates of hunger increase during the pandemic. But what's interesting is that when we look at solutions to hunger and promoting food access, is that we really look at taking action on promoting nutrition security within the broader context of the local and regional food systems. And what AB 125 would do, as well as the budget request that we've submitted to the state legislature, is that there'd be $155 million in state funds that would go towards supporting infrastructure in some of the most important places where people live, where they learn, where they work, where they shop, and where they access food. So the $155 million would be split among schools. School food is often one of the primary sources of nutrition for our children and youth. And there would be over about $50 million going towards improving infrastructure for school meals. That way more school food service directors can source foods locally and responsibly, and include foods that are grown organically and from farmers of color. There's also funding that would go towards food banks and nonprofit hunger relief organizations to help them be prepared for disasters, whether it's COVID or wildfires or drought or other types of natural or man-made disasters. There'd also be about $55 million in grants going to a variety of community organizations and tribes to help bolster support for farmers markets, community-supported agriculture, urban agriculture, mobile markets, healthy food retail, and health clinics to, again, assure that more people within our communities can get access to healthy, locally grown foods. And then lastly, there would be $20 million in funding going towards improving senior nutrition programs. Taken together, we want to make sure that our community members have access to nutrient-dense foods grown organically and responsibly here in California. So I'm really excited about the potential of this bond and funding.
Wow. That's a very impressive list. I mean, when you, between what you and Cesar shared about, there's two huge pieces of the food and farming system, which is getting people healthy food and farm workers who make it possible for all of us to eat. So, Jeannie, that leaves another big piece, which is, how this funding would improve agriculture's impact on both climate change and the many other environmental factors that farming and ranching impact.
Yeah, I would say here with the California Climate and Ag Network, we've worked a lot on this because we know that California farmers and ranchers are certainly among the most innovative farmers in the country when it comes to conservation management, organic farming, and practices that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase carbon sinks. And so the bond is really focused on how do we further support sustainable agricultural solutions to slow the impacts of climate change and reduce pollution overall. And the bond would invest in a variety of ag practices and solutions to do anything from, say, reduce our wildfire risk, invest in farmland conservation, to help keep our farms viable and resilient. Some specific examples are that it would the bond would provide stable multi-year funding for a number of the state's climate smart agriculture programs that provide technical assistance and financial resources for farmers to transition to practices like healthy soils, to increase carbon sinks on farms, to the state water efficiency and enhancement program, which is all about how to save water and energy and help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's funding in there to support beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers of color, to be able to get access to farmland and set up viable farm businesses. There's also funding available for tribal governments and tribal organizations to support work on food safety and a variety of food and ag initiatives in tribal communities. So we're excited that the bond presents an opportunity to really scale up agriculture's response to the climate crisis and help farms become more resilient and better able to withstand greater weather extremes.
Yeah, that's, this is obviously why Roots of Change has been really excited about this bill and spent a lot of time this year working on it with you all, because it is groundbreaking in that it's touching so many things. One of the things that we're really excited about because of the work we're doing about meat processing is the money that's committed to food processing infrastructure around the state. It's really hard sometimes for local food systems to buy local food if it's not cut in the proper way. So there could be food hub type facilities that would help make it possible for schools to buy directly from local producers by getting the fresh fruits and vegetables cut to the right sizes for the kids. Another really important thing that we're really excited about is meat processing. There's money in there for helping to create more plants around the state. We have a huge shortage in capacity for both slaughter facilities and the cut and wrap facilities where the meat's wrapped for market. And small ranchers, medium-sized ranchers up and down the state have had a terrible year accessing those plants because of COVID, and that knocked out the really big plants, and all the big farmers and big ranches and got access to those plants. So we have a real lack of resilience in our meat processing system in the state of California, and this could, I think, help it a lot, certainly in combination with some of the federal programs that are being considered and possibly funded in the coming year with infrastructure investments at the federal level. So that's a question I have actually to all of you. Are you, what do you think the synergies might emerge with the federal funding that's going to be pouring into the state and the potential for Biden's infrastructure and family investments? What do you think might happen there? Anybody have some thoughts?
I can weigh in on that. I think certainly one of the reasons why California has such a significant surplus is the $26 billion coming from the federal government to support COVID response, and those dollars need to be expended sometime between now and the year 2024. And so that just provides an opportunity for the state of California to really think about how do we climb out of the pandemic and ensure that Californians are healthy and have access to healthy food and safe jobs. And I think what we've learned in the course of the pandemic, as Andy and Cesar have said, is that out of this crisis, we have a real opportunity to reshape how we do food and agriculture in a way in California that is good for workers, good for the environment, good for farmers, and good for all of California. And certainly the federal investment, both in this immediate $26 billion granting essentially from the federal government will be critical. But then certainly as the Biden-Harris plan on infrastructure goes forward, we think there are real opportunities for investment in the food and agriculture infrastructure in California. We haven't done that kind of systematic investment in food processing and food hubs and food bank infrastructure in a long, long time in California. And now is the time. We simply cannot afford to have more than 6 million Californians go hungry, which is where we are currently, and that's just unacceptable.
Yeah, it seems like simultaneous drought, fires, pandemic are creating the silver lining is that there could be some real fundamental changes that would help us make it through what appears to be, based on the science that we're seeing, a century of one disaster after another. And the state government has a responsibility to prepare and support the people in being able to deal with that, it seems to me. So I am encouraged by this. And, so Cesar got to it a bit and Andy got to it a bit in this whole idea of equity and justice. And so, Andy, maybe you could start and talk about, how this effort moves us further and how the people involved in this effort are trying to move further down into this question of creating equity and justice in the food system. I mean, and really at the center of the coalition's goals. What do you see happening there?
Sure. So our coalition has prioritized equity as a core component. Not only is it part of the title of the bond, but it's part of all aspects of what we seek and aim to do. As Jeannie mentioned before, bond funding would go specifically towards socially disadvantaged producers, farmers and ranchers of color, and low-income communities. And one thing that's really important to note is that at least 40% of the funding would be allocated specifically towards farmers and ranchers of color and low-income communities. So I think that's really important to point out.
And that includes farm workers, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I think the other piece too is that when you look at issues of food and access to food, the bond also considers some of the more social determinants of health. So looking at access to safe housing, access to safe drinking water, particularly for farm workers. But also when it comes to food distribution, one of the biggest challenges is getting healthy local foods directly to the communities that are most impacted by injustices in our food system. Well, what if we invest directly in communities and help build wealth, infrastructure, and capital so communities can develop their own solutions to maintain control over their food systems and have a say in where their food comes from? And that's exactly what the bond is intending to do.
Hi, this is Michael. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Flipping the Table, sponsored by Roots of Change. I love sharing the compelling people and projects that are creating a better food and farming future, a future in sync with and healing of nature, a future good for rural communities, and one supportive of our food chain workers from farm and ranch to table, and certainly one that is healthier for our bodies. I need your support to keep Roots of Change vital and to keep this podcast alive. So please, go to our website, rootsofchange.org, that is rootsofchange.org, and hit the donate button. Your generous support will help me, our team, and allies to build a better future for our kids, communities, and for you. There is much to do, and every dollar you donate helps the cause. Thank you. Now let's get back to the show. You and I, as part of the coalition, are involved in some conversations that, working in the legislative process is a very difficult thing to do because it's a place where huge compromises are made. And oftentimes, things that we're shooting for, we don't get done because the compromise does not allow it. And with the effort to bring environmental justice, social justice, and environmental and food advocates together, we we may not get everything we hope for. Do you think that the trust that's beginning to build between these different streams in this progressive movement, if that trust is strong enough to hold us together, if in fact we don't get everything we want and some people get less than others, some streams of that movement get less than others? I mean, are we going to be able to hold this thing together?
I think so. And I think that given we've brought together a group of experienced, thoughtful people who want to find solutions that are viable, California already has identified strategies that are shovel ready that can work to be implemented. And now it's about thinking of what are ways to create access to those strategies by investing in funding for communities, tribes, and other organizations that need the most support. So I feel like I do have a certain sense of optimism. And I think given the leadership within our coalition, the leadership at the state, the leadership by Assembly Member Robert Rivas, I think there's urgency. This is the right time, and I believe we can make it happen. Mm-hmm. If not now, when? So
Cesar, hearing this from Andy and this conversation around the search for more and more equity in the food system through this bond and this budget request, are you surprised at the existence of the coalition, and or does it change your calculus about what might be possible in the future?
Well, this coalition does give hope, because I think some of the problems that are being addressed are the result of underinvestment over the years in a lot of brown and indigenous communities in California. And what this bond is doing is really strategically looking at what are the challenges that those communities are facing and how can we really address those. Everything from food at schools to the way that the people that take the crops are treated, and making sure that all of California has a food system that's a lot healthier, and an environment for workers in agriculture. And agriculture doesn't necessarily just mean out in the field, but it's also, all the workers that are from the, farm to table, everything from the field products that go into the warehouses, that go into the trucks, that go into our grocery stores. And all those chains, need to be protected, including our environment. And so this AB 125 goes a long way to addressing those, and bringing in a diverse coalition. I think it was really important for issues of equity, and it was important to really put in the policy, to say that a significant percentage needs to be targeted at where the need is in brown and indigenous communities across California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so as you say that, it makes me think back to the fact that I think there are, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are 17 actual sponsors that worked with Mr. Rivas to craft the language in the bill. But one of the early actions of the coalition was to invite well over 100 organizations to participate in a series of phone calls, focus groups, you might say, where we listened mm-hmm. based on the planks to what people wanted, right?
Yes, it was. And, Assembly Member Rivas becoming chair of the Ag Committee in the Assembly really took on that challenge and traveled up and down the state right before the pandemic to really help communities, speak, firsthand to the chair of the committee. And what we saw during the pandemic, that some of the challenges and problems that were highlighted in those conversations were even more acute and really needed to be addressed. And so that's how we developed AB 125 with a large coalition of, worker rights organizations, environmental organizations, and just organizations across California to really come and tackle these issues head on in a really strategic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Andy, I'm curious, and I want to hear from you too, Jeannie, on this. But I mean, in your experience, I mean, you had a very interesting perch, Andy, to look from when you were with Food and Nutrition Service for USDA. I mean, is this an unusual coalition, the size and breadth and scope and diversity?
Oh, it's
Or is that
definitely
just a pipe dream?
unusual.
Go ahead.
No, I think it's for me. It's the first time, and even when we went back to when we were doing our lobby week, it was really meaningful to have in one room people that were advocating for worker rights, people advocating for sustainable agriculture, people advocating for food access, and people advocating for supporting farm stable infrastructure. And I felt for the first time getting like-minded people around the table to think about how are we going to build a better food system. It's possible, and for me that was really exciting because typically I felt over my career that that much of the work is done in silos, and we can really create change when we all come together. Because at the end of the day, our food system only works when each piece of it, from growing to distribution to processing to marketing to compost and waste, it all has to work in as part of one broader system. And this coalition, these leaders, the people that are part of it, are able to make that change happen.
Mm-hmm. And Jeannie, I mean, you've had years working at the policy level, both in the Midwest on DC policy, and for the last many years working for CalCan in California. I mean, how unusual is it for you to see this?
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to work on issues of agriculture and the environment since the mid '90s, and this was the first time I've seen such a diverse coalition come together to address multiple issues in our food and farming system. So I would agree with what Cesar and Andy had to say, which is that this is a very unique, and I think as a consequence, very powerful coalition that's come together. And we've seen the benefits of that. With the first hearing of AB 125 was in the Assembly Agriculture Committee, which tends to be a more moderate committee in terms of its membership. And AB 125 got a vote of 10-0 in favor. And it had bipartisan support. We don't often see bipartisan support for bond measures. That's fairly unusual. It's often carried by the Democratic supermajority. And that simply wasn't the case with AB 125, I think. And that's because it speaks to the diversity of needs in our food and farm system, and it will benefit the farmer in the Central Valley as well as the community group in Oakland and farm worker housing that's needed on the coast, and much, much more. So I think the power of AB 125 is that it was really developed by those on the ground who most understand what we need in our food and farm system. And I think, as we've said before, the pandemic has really revealed what the weaknesses are. We all experienced going to our grocery stores at the beginning of the pandemic and seeing some of the shelves empty. And that was a surprise, I think, for many Californians to realize how vulnerable some of our food distribution and supply chains are. And we know with the climate crisis that we need to take care of those vulnerabilities now so that we are more resilient when future extreme weather events happen.
Yeah, like maybe this summer. Living in Sonoma County, I'm really paranoid right now. It's just, we had our big warnings already. We've already had a fire here. It's just nuts. So, I do believe, from my perspective, a similar perspective of all of you, that I have not seen this before. And it says to me that the effort, that the different movements that have existed kind of flowing or being in silos, as Andy described it, are maturing in a way that allows them to work together. I've never seen a coalition like this actually throw money in the pot in the way that it's done. Usually that's done by big greens and either the big labor organizations or the big environmental organizations that have huge memberships and have the funding. But I really noticed how Some of the smaller NGOs, nonprofits that are part of this threw in money, and everybody's been committing a ton of time to organize. I was really impressed by how the lobby week went down. People organized into groups all around the state of California, and we had a crew that set up meetings, and then tons of people showed up and practiced and then went into the meetings with the legislators or the legislative staffs and made the pitches. And it was beautiful. It was really heartwarming for me to see it. And there were a lot of young people who had never done that before who were involved, and they were the most passionate. And you could see the legislators and the staffers light up when those young people were in there saying, speaking with the energy that they spoke with. It was, I don't know if you guys had a similar experience, but I was really touched by that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've done many a lobby visit, and this was, as you say, a really fun experience because people were speaking from their hearts and their own experience, and we were able to touch on many different issues in those meetings in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past.
Let's ask Cesar, because you worked for Sam Farr. Sam Farr was so many years working on these on agriculture issues. What did you think of the lobby days that you experienced?
Well, you're right. My experience was back in the early 2000s with Sam Farr, member of the Ag Committee and Agricultural Appropriations Committee, and it's so rare to be in a meeting when you have such a large coalition that elected officials tend to play off groups with each other and say, well, I can't support it because this isn't supportive, or because we're not all talking the same language and politicians are able to get out of it. And this was a unique opportunity for such a vast coalition to speak as one voice, all of us having different parts that drove us to be in the room, but we all have come together under AB 125 to really show what we could do in it, and that's rarely done in government. Mm-hmm. It's rarely done that you have a bipartisan support of such a large bill. In $3 billion, requesting for such a large list of investments that have really been underinvested over the years, that this would allow California to really catch up.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I'm going to ask Jeannie one last question, and then I think all of us can have some closing thoughts. But Jeannie, from your perspective, how do you estimate the success of this budget ask or the bill at this point, the bond next year? Do you think the funds will flow? Do you think it'll make it to some form of these requests will make it to a bond measure in 2022 that goes before the voters?
Well, I would say in terms of the budget ask, where we're trying to seek money for some of the AB 125 investments this year because of the state's large surplus, I think there's real opportunity there. We're already beginning to see some of the investments that we've proposed on the farm worker safety and well-being has been proposed by the Senate. We're seeing increased investments being proposed by the Senate and the governor for some of the climate smart agriculture programs. So there's more work to be done to ensure that we get the diversity of funding for AB 125 type investments in the current budget. And all of that will play out in the next few weeks. So we will know soon enough if our advocacy is successful, but we're already beginning to see some bright spots and some hope for that, which is encouraging. And then I think in terms of the bond itself, we did some early polling to get a sense of what California voters think about these issues. And overwhelmingly, majority of voters are supportive of efforts that help to combat wildfire, that protect farm workers, that increase food security. So I think there's real promise for AB 125. As I said, we have bipartisan support. We had 160 organizations of all different kinds, from local government to public health to food access groups to farm groups and others, who came out in support of 125 at our first hearing. So I think the momentum is certainly building. And our eyes are on the prize right now with the current budget, and then we'll return to the longer-term effort on the bond after that.
Great. So before I turn it over to Andy and Cesar with closing comments, how can people support this effort? Are there other opportunities for people listening to weigh in and support what's happening here?
We really do want people to contact their Assembly and Senate members in support of investing in the economic recovery and resilience of food and ag systems right now. And we can provide more information about that through our website, which is voteforyourfood.org, I believe.
Voteforyourfood.org. Voteforyourfood.org. That's correct.
That's right. And so in the next week, it's not up there now, but I think in the next week we will have a link where people can get more information about contacting their Assembly and Senate members.
So, Cesar, I'm going to throw it to you. What are your closing thoughts on this?
Well, this is really a good opportunity for California to really stand up for workers, stand up for the environment, and really invest in areas that haven't been invested enough in California. And so looking forward to the discussion during this current budget cycle to see what we could do to invest in what's being proposed in AB 125, and also down the road when AB 125 comes to voters, that we support it, that we really stand up for workers and for all of California to really have a more robust food system that really takes into consideration workers in the environment.
Great. So, Andy, what are your closing thoughts?
Well, if you've eaten food today, you are an advocate or can be an advocate for creating change in our food system. And we're seeing right now that demand for local food and especially demand for foods that are grown organically is increasing at all income levels and across many different population subgroups. And now is the time to meet the demand by investing in a better future for our food and farming systems. And if we want to feed everyone with dignity and with culturally relevant and nutritionally dense foods, now's the time to build the infrastructure to make that happen. And AB 125 is a viable path forward. So I'm really excited about our future journey.
Great. Well, I just want to remind everybody to keep track of what's going on. You can go to voteforyourfood.org. That's the website for this campaign. And we will keep you posted on all the things that you can do through that website. So I want to thank Andy Najaris from the Agricultural Institute of Marin, Cesar Lara from the Monterey Bay Central Labor Council, and Jeannie Merrill from the California Climate and Agriculture Network for your work, your leadership on this, for your collegial processes of rallying folks, and for your attention and time today in this conversation. Thank you very much. Hey, this is Michael. As you know, Flipping the Table is sponsored by Roots of Change. You can keep our program going by making a contribution to Roots of Change through our website, rootsofchange.org.